Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess. In today's episode, I'm going to follow up last week's episode where we talked about the history of Auschwitz. Today, I'm going to tell you about the common gag of Auschwitz, Rudolf Hoss. Now, to make it easier, I'm just going to read an article that I came across about the life of Rudolf Hoss and what it was all about. So, when you think of common gags of out of concentration camps, person that may come to mind is Armengoff, who was played by Ralph Fiennes in the 1993 film. 1993 film, Schindler's List. Now, he was a very cruel character, very it was very, what's the word? It was very cruel. It was very barbaric. He would just shoot random people wherever he felt like it from a window or whatever. But Rudolf Hoss wasn't like that. And it says here, according to his interrogator at the Nuremberg trials, which was a lady called Whitney Harris, according to her, Hoss appeared normal. She described it like a grocery clerk. And former prisoners of Auschwitz would attest to that description of him, where they added also that he always appeared calm and collected. And there is no known record within the archives of Rudolf Hoss actually personally hitting or abusing or killing any of the prisoners in camp. Like he's like the Armengoff in Schindler's List, for example. He was a very barbaric and very violent character. He didn't care about what punishment he brought out to prisoners. Apparently, though, Rudolf Hoss wasn't like that. So Hoss actually didn't live very far away from the crematorium of Auschwitz. He and his family, along with his wife and children, actually lived a few yards away from the crematorium at Auschwitz, and apparently they lived quite a normal, idyllic, life, just a few yards where the atrocities were taking place. And that is very similar to, if you've ever seen the film The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, where the father takes up a position at a concentration camp as a common gag, and the family live on the compound very near to the camp where people were being murdered. And so it's quite horrifying, really, that Hoss and his family actually lived an idyllic German, family life a few yards away from where all the murders and the beatings and horrific activity was actually taking place. And Auschwitz was actually the first camp where the first killings of using Zyklon B was used. We talked about Zyklon B last week, didn't we, when we discussed, the history of Auschwitz. Zyklon B was actually introduced as a more effective way of killing thousands of people, undesirables, mainly Jewish people, in gas chambers. because this was partly this formed the basis of the Varsity conference meeting that took place in the attendance of many Nazi officials, such as Reinhard Heydrich, Adolf Eichmann, and Heinrich Himmler, who was Rudolf Hoss's boss, and they discussed the final solution to the Jewish question, and this meeting took place on the 20th of January 1942. And even though, Hoss didn't actually, it's been said that Hoss didn't actually kill any of the prisoners or beat any of the prisoners. He was actually, as the commandant, he was actually responsible for overseeing the killings and the barbaric murders of all these people. It is said, but he oversaw the murders and brutal killings of over 1 million prisoners. But it's quite a sickening, really, that he could preside over all them killings and then, after a day's work, go home to his family and live, the idyllic German family life, which that to me doesn't, you can't even begin to comprehend that. That isn't a normal working day, but to him that was normal. And it has been argued that because Hoss can oversee them brutal murders and then go home and act as everything was all right, makes him a more terrifying figure than the Armin Goff. Armin Goff was actually a real person who was portrayed, like I say, by Ralph Fiennes in the film Schindler's List. And when I was doing the series with the Holocaust scholar Jennifer Boyer, she actually told me that when Ralph Fiennes was on set portraying Armin Goff, some of the prisoners was people who played the prisoners, or some of the real life prisoners, actually felt so scared of Ralph Fiennes because it looked so like the real Armin Goff that he was portraying in the film. So, like many of his other Nazi counterparts, Hoss's thoughts and opinions towards the Jews and other non-desirables that were non-desirable by the Nazis was actually came across as many things as like he shared the views of as many, Nazi counterparts, as many Nazi colleagues, where he thought that, he looked at the history of Germany over the past so many decades, and he lived through, German oppression, the German recession, and he, like many other, Nazis, believed that, like Hitler, believed that the Jews were overall responsible for the overall hardship that Germany had suffered. So he was born in the town of Baden-Baden in Germany, in the Black Forest. Yes, that's where the name Black Forest Ghetto comes from. There is a real place within Germany called uh, called the Black Forest, and that is where we get the name Black Forest Ghetto. I mean, that is one of my all-time favourite desserts. I always like to have it at Christmas Day, mainly as my dessert after my Christmas lunch. But that's just my personal opinion. So he was born in 1900 to Catholic parents. Uh, and he didn't have a very nice childhood. So his views and his beliefs in later life was actually shaped by earlier people throughout his life. So for example, he had an overbearing father. Um, he served this. He served. He served in the First World War within the German army. Um, and he took, but like Hitler, who also served in the First World War, like Hitler himself, he also felt um, utterly betrayed, and you know that he was deeply affected, and he was very angry, like Hitler was when Germany lost the First World War, and they lost territories to other nations due to the Treaty of Versailles, and that's where he got his anti-Semitic views, like Hitler did. Um, he was also involved in a lot of violent and vicious right wing politics. So he took part in a lot of violent protests that like the like hit like Hitler Hoss also ended up in prison for a period of 2 years. Um, it's quite interesting that um, Hitler also led the Munich beer hall putsch at the same time that hit that Hoss was taking part in politically involved murders for the undesirables that they felt had no place on the earth. So, like Hitler and Hoss was very determined to find the answer of why the Germans lost had lost the First World War, because Germany ultimately surrendered to the enemies. And obviously, like Hitler, he was very angry about the agreement with the Treaty of Versailles. And like I said, they obviously thought that, the Jews were ultimately responsible for the loss of the First World War for the Germans. Um, And even though, many German Jews fought for Germany in the First World War and many had lost their life, trying to defend the country, that didn't matter to people like, Horst and Hitler and other Nazi enthusiasts. They wanted to find someone to blame for the ultimate loss of the war. And the Jews, the German Jews, and ultimately as it progressed, the Jews of mainly Eastern Europe were ultimately to blame for the loss. It didn't matter that thousands of German Jews, lost their lives fighting for their country in 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 the First World War. They just wanted a scapegoat, and the easy scapegoats for the Germans were the Jews. Um, so Hoss wasn't just a member, a loyal member of the Nazi Party. He was also one of the founding members. So he joined up in November in the year of 1922. Um, and he was spotted by um, another prominent Nazi figure in the Nazi Party, and that is Heinrich Himmler, who was the third right leader of the SS, the Nazi police. Um, and he actually knew Hoss from you know earlier years. Um, and Horst didn't actually start his career in Auschwitz Birkenau, and he actually started his career a, as a concentration camp in Dachau. Now, as we discussed last week, I think last week, Dachau was the first concentration camp ever to be built within the Nazi regime, and this was built in Bavaria, which is the capital of the German city of Munich. So the first concentration camp of Dachau was actually built in Germany, and this is where Horst began his career as a concentration camp guard, and where he received his training that would ultimately lead him to be the common guard on two occasions at Auschwitz, but Auschwitz. Um, and Dachau wasn't like a death camp. It came into existence on the 22nd of March in the year 1933. This was just less than 2 months before after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Um, This was very, very different to other concentration death camps from like Treblinka and Auschwitz. But you know, because Auschwitz, Dachau wasn't a death camp. It wasn't an extermination camp. In fact, it was the majority of people, of prisoners who were sent to Dachau were like prisoners of war, you know, a lot of prisoner of war prisoners, and they were actually released within 18 months of their arrival. So they weren't killed unlike prisoners were at Auschwitz and Treblinka. Um, um, Although no like mass murder took place at Dachau, the very first concentration camp. That but having said that, even though no mass murder um, took place, there was still a lot of innate and barbaric suffering that was suffered at the hands of the prison guards, that the prisoners suffered. So um and the, and through this immense barbaric suffering, a lot of the prisoners who did get sent to Dachau weren't set free. They actually died as a result of a lot of this physical, you know, torture. Um, So Hoss was spent a total of 3.5 years as a prison guard at Dachau. And this was and during his 3.5 years as in this role at Dachau, this was to play a defining role in shaping his future mentality that would serve him quite, you know, well in terms of barbarity. When he later became, you know, when he later became, came to serve 2 terms as commandant at Auschwitz. Um, there was a man who was the first um, who was the very first commandant at Dachau. Um, and in the year 1934, he rose to be the even higher, the even higher role of the inspector of the concentrated. And his role in that higher regard was to be the inspector of the concentration camps that were in district that were in existence at the time, and his orders were that, you know, no member of the SS or the Nazi Party or future guards of future camps were to be soft. You know, they had to have a hard line and a very hard line. We couldn't, you know, show any sympathy towards the prisoners. They had to, otherwise they would be removed from the Nazi ranks. So they were under strict orders to be strict and, you know, cruel and barbaric to prisoners. Um, He arrived in the camp of Auschwitz, in Auschwitz-Birkenau, in the year of 1940. At this time, Hoss had 6 years experience of service with working in a concentration camp, and he at this time he felt this was his biggest challenge, to take on the role of commandant at Auschwitz. Um, and um, this was when, first Auschwitz was coming into existence, being built um, from vermin infested former army barracks. Um, and this time he knew what was expected of him from his experience working in Dachau and other concentration camps. Uh, so Auschwitz, as we did discuss last week, was originally put, poorly resourced camp for political prisoners of war, obviously with some Polish prisoners of war, because the Germans hated Poles, and they were one of the undesirable groups that were hated by the Nazis and the Germans. Um, um, and it was also a prison also for Soviet prisoners in July 1941. And ultimately, the ultimate goal was, firstly, they had these prisoners, Soviet prisoners, working in the factories producing oil and rubber. But the ultimate goal was to, murder these group of people that they termed subhuman. And this was when the first experiment came about of them using Zyklon B crystals that they would pour through a hatch and kill thousands of people, and this was later to be used to kill other prisoners, mostly Jews, that would arrive to Auschwitz on the trains, on the cattle trains, from of many different parts of Eastern Europe and other areas. Um, and Hart described himself that when this first experiment was carried out with Zyklon B, he witnessed the first experiment of the killing, where he wore a mask over his face, a gas mask, so he himself wouldn't inhale any of the gas crystals. And he said that it was over so quickly once the Zyklon B crystals were poured in through the hatch. You would just hear a smothered cry, and then they'd be dead quickly. So this served as a very quick method, an easy method for them mass murders that would take place later on. Um, and he actually, not only did he oversee the murders of, millions of people at Auschwitz, but when um when the new camp at Auschwitz was being built, that was um known as Auschwitz Birkenau. This was where, the killings would take place, um, where the gas chambers were. And he actually oversaw the rescue, the creation of the crematoriums, where, after, people had been killed in the gas chambers, the crematorium would be the place where the bodies would be taken to be burnt and then thrown into a mass grave, or the ashes spread somewhere. It was often said at Auschwitz you could smell all the burning and see the burning ash through the sky from like the burning bodies and everything. It must have been terribly awful. Um, um, and these crematoriums were built in the year of 1943. Uh, and it was actually in the year of 1942 that Jewish people were sent to Auschwitz from all over Europe. This was, the Nazis' final solution um to the Jewish question being finally carried out. Um, so he actually thought that, this mass killing people by gas um, was actually more effective, not only in the way that it would, it could kill millions of people at one time, but he was actually more concerned as well with the physical and uh, mental physical and psychological damage. He thought that this would cause, less physiological and physical damage to his work, to his men who were carrying out his orders. Um, that this was a better that mass murder by gas in prisoners would have a better psychological and physical effect on them rather than killing people by firing squad. He believed that killing people by firing squad would have much more physical consequences and psychological consequences compared to killing people in gas chambers, which is a very warped sense. But the Nazis were very warped and sick people, and you just don't understand the mentality whatsoever. Right, so that concludes this week's edition of the An Extra Slice of History with the Butterfly Princess show with the Butterfly Princess. Thank you for joining me, and don't forget we've only got 2 more episodes of this before Christmas, so I will see you next week. Have a lovely rest of your week, and bye for now. Bye bye.